Return out the ugly. Return out the ugly. Return out the ugly. Return out the ugly. This night is rocking. This night is rocking away. It's kind of shocking. It's kind of shocking to say. No dancing, this is gonna be the best one yet. Return out the ugly. Return out the ugly. Return out the ugly. Return out the ugly.
Hello and welcome to For All That episode 28, and we're back from our little break. Andrew, you feeling refreshed?
No, not at all. I was in Legoland, amongst other things. One of my friends was getting married, so we went on a small jaunt, which was most entertaining because we forced the poor fellow to wear a tutu and a princess sort of train, which went down very, very badly among the series of walnut-faced old harridans who'd take their grandchildren to Legoland. They thought, I think, that he was a sexual degenerate. So it was all good.
Was it a bit of reconnaissance to see if we'll be modelling a future independent Scotland on Legoland?
Well, certainly they did have a little mini buildings which sort of anatomized all of those buildings in Britain, which I find problematic, from your Lego House of Commons to your sort of St Paul's Cathedral, that great temple to British sensibility and mammon. Yeah, so those bits and pieces there. They also have Edinburgh Castle, which I was surprised by, and a small Lego Piper. The Peabrach roaring, etc., etc.
Have they got a small Lego Alex Salmond?
There's not enough Lego in the world to make Alex Salmond. Maybe we could make a Lego Alex Salmond. They do have a Lego Darth Vader, so I dare say we could probably gather together the bricks and make a great Lego monument to the First Minister if and when we become independent.
Okay, and we're also joined today by Callum McCormick, who's a PhD student, I believe, in environmental policy, and he's a contributor to Bella Caledonia. How's it going, Callum?
Very good, very good.
I suppose our first topic for this week has to be the last night's by-election. I suppose we'll start with Andrew. Did you sit up watching it last night?
I did. I'm sufficiently tragic to do that. Yes, and on it went. They seem to be counting every vote twice, just in case. Apparently, the returning officer was a stickler, a particular. Well, heaven knows what that is, and it's always a bit of a worry if you think that other returning officers aren't sticklers for counting the vote. But it was a good result for the SNP overall, I think. I mean, it would have been very bad for Mark McDonald personally if he'd lost. It'd be bad for the party because it would put the party's majority in the Parliament distinctly in peril. And I think, the majority was cut down to around 2,000 over Labour from the heights of the 2011 Holyrood election of when Brian Adam, who died, got 55% of the vote in Aberdeen Donside. So I think the Nats can be quite pleased with themselves. And the Labour Party, via the great person of Anna Sawa, my very, very favourite of the party's politicians, was making a whole range of excuses to explain why it was unwinnable for Labour and why we shouldn't really focus on whether they were marching forward very much in this election.
Was he accusing Mark McDonald of being like Pol Pot or something this time?
No, actually, he was. I mean, he has the sort of aspect of the pre-recorded message, and a very good memory as well for trotting out the party line. It was quite funny though, because I was watching STV, because it tends to be just slightly less arid these days than the kind of gloomy BBC studio, and there's less risk that John Curtis will appear on the screen as he's not on an STV stipend. And actually, Sawa he made a few generous comments about Scottish civic nationalism via the SNP, in addition to his usual snark and partisanship. So he was less objectionable than I usually find him as a hutchy boy.
And Callum, did you have any particular thoughts on it?
Well, I did. I watched the Spot on Tonight programme, same as Andrew, and I thought the highlight of the night for me was the Liberal Democrat claiming that the Liberal Democrat being in coalition had no effect on the party support in Scotland, which that was absolutely fascinating, that this is what a delusion he's got himself into. But I mean, I think by-election generally was quite dire affair, but I didn't think it really caught the imagination. I mean, didn't catch the imagination many people Donside apparently by the turnout, but I mean, I did stay up to 2 in the morning to watch the results. So yeah, I think I agree with Andrew. It was a good result for SNP. But the funny part about the response was the consensus seemed to be, according to what I could make out, was that the vote to elect the SNP candidate was a vote against independence, which I thought was an extraordinary sort of bent on the result. But that seems to be the consensus in both the studios. I think both seem to be really obsessed with the fact that the unionist vote was the majority in the constituency. But I think that was pretty much that was stretching the credibility really.
Can we read anything into the fact that the turnout was very low? The McDonald mentioned it himself in his victory speech. Do you think we can read anything into that?
Well, I think I really dislike this sort of blame the voters for low turnout. I think voters will vote if they see they have an attractive option to vote for. I mean, I think there's a sort of the political class generally likes to, blame the voters for, apathy or so-called apathy about politics. I mean, if there's apathy in the general public, that is absolutely the fault of politicians. Politicians need to give people something attractive to go out and vote for. So, I mean, the vote as a Democrat, I think I would like to see more people vote, but the only way to do that is to have a sort of engaging political culture that actually attracts people to it rather than repels them. So I think the political class generally have to stop blaming voters and actually look at their own house in order to address turnout issues.
I'm forced to agree with that. I always find it very strange when a politician goes on one about how, the public don't trust politicians and it's disgraceful. Well, look at the way you behave. It's obvious.
Exactly.
With expenses scandals and, public trust of politicians was much higher during the days when they actually resigned if they did something wrong. Now they just sort of bareface it out. But yeah, we'll go to Andrew. Did you notice anything interesting cephalogically in the whole affair?
No, I didn't. But I just wanted to come in on what you were just saying there, because I think there's an interesting wider point when we're thinking and talking about apathy and engagement with representative democracy. And I think it's the question about how we think about our citizenship. Should we try and make active citizens that feel politically empowered, that it's not just about a vote every 4 years, or in this case, extraordinarily in a by-election? And I think there is a sense that the idea that active citizenship amounts to turning out and voting seems to me a pretty thin form of political gruel. It doesn't seem to me a very emancipatory vision of politics, which tries to say, well, actually, it's important not just to get the punters out on by-election day to the tune of 38%, but it's more important to say to people and to raise people in our kind of society, in our schools, to believe that they have a voice and actually to have one in terms of our politics. So I like you were saying, both of you there, I think there is this sort of blame the punters type argument is kind of rather unsatisfactory. It isn't really aspirational enough, because no one's going to be terribly inspired by a dreary band of grey men in grey suits, I don't think. And I think we really have to look at how we can sort of stimulate a far more active sense of citizenship.
So what did you make of Farage not managing to do anything specifically? Nobody even noticed his candidate. It was just Farage that came up to speak. It was quite funny when Bernard Ponsonby gave him a good going over, if you saw that as well.
I did, yes. The Stirling by-election when the SNP stopped being anti-English sometime in... When exactly, Nigel? Yes, I mean, they lost their deposit, in order to keep your deposit, you need 5% of the vote, and I think UKIP got 4.8. That said, however, they did get over 1,000 punters voting for them, which is not an insignificant section of that particular electorate. But I think people who want to see in this an example of Scotland sending them homeward to think again in the proverb will be quite satisfied that they didn't keep their deposit. But I do think there is something in this sort of sense that it's just an English phenomenon and you don't have your Scottish UKIPers is probably a wee bit of an overstatement. I think there's less enthusiasm, but 1,000 votes is not insubstantial.
I was quite disappointed to actually see them get, I think it was 4.8% or something.
Yeah, that's right.
I was a little bit disappointed in that. Callum, what do you think? UKIP, Farage?
Yeah, I just caught the end of Andrew's remarks there. I think I tend to agree. I think there is this sort of attitude, especially on the Scottish left, that UKIP is a sort of singularly English phenomenon. And I mean, there obviously is a lot of truth to that, but I think there is a place in Scottish society for sort of reaction. There's no doubt about that. I mean, and that's obviously what they've got on offer. And I think you actually look at Aberdeen or Northern Scotland generally, like, I think that is a place where far-right politics has had a base historically. The National Front used to have a vote there. The British National Party even used to have, to the extent they never had a vote in Scotland, had a base there. So I think there is space in Scotland for that kind of reactionary stuff. But I think the way Scottish politics polarised between the over the independence referendum, it's difficult for UKIP really to get any sort of traction in the way they can in England.
I think.
Can I just pick up actually, sorry, on what Callum was saying? It's a really important point, and it's quite often overlooked. But if you go back, you're asking a cephalological point. Here's the belated cephalological point that in terms of BNP performance, it's not Glasgow, it's not inner city Glasgow or whatever that gets the high rates. It's up in Aberdeen, which absolutely. And it's important, and it's a long-standing sort of feature that actually that's where they prosper best. So in that sense, I don't know insofar as how much that's a kind of Aberdeenshire thing and how much that's an Aberdeen city thing, because I'm not very familiar with the Granite City, its geography or its politics. But I think it's something we ought to bear in mind when we're talking about this. This is a part of the country where, despite one would have thought not having terrifically many immigrants, that parties espousing these kind of ideas do quite well.
Yeah, all I was going to say there was that I can't imagine they'd have done so well in Glasgow.
No, probably not.
Yeah. So I think we should move on to our second topic, which is a little bit different. The Road To Referendum documentaries. I've seen the first two, so if you two have seen all three, don't tell me the score, because I'm going to try and avoid it, try and see it that way. But Callum, what did you make of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think for what they were quite proficient, and it was interesting. I don't think it broke any new ground intellectual historically. I think especially the first episode was there was too much of the kind of, the 60s great, the 70s rubbish, rock and roll, Elvis and Presley, all that sort of stuff, which, I think I could have done with less of that and more of the actual politics. I mean, I think, for instance, I've been doing some work recently on the Suez stuff, and they kind of skipped over that. I think that's actually quite an important moment in the kind of slow decline of the British state, the kind of disaster of Suez, in the way that kind of showed to people that the British Empire or British imperialism was really on the way out, and sort of it soured relations with France. And I think there was more that could have been said about that. But I think, it was quite interesting. I mean, I think the episode on the sort of period from Thatcher until Blair was kind of the more interesting aspect of kind of the rise of a kind of political nationalism, because the first episode talks about how Scottish nationalism is kind of essentially a kind of romantic gesture from suppers and fears about Bannockburn and so on. So I think the second episode, which got into how political nationalism sort of emerged for SNP, Hamilton by-election, Govan by-election, and so on, I think that was much more strong. But as I said, I don't think, maybe I know too much about it, but I think it was kind of an interesting introduction to the topic. I don't think it's necessarily going to cause any ripples up or down the line.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I was quite interested by its structure, because I didn't quite know what it was going to be. I knew there was going to be 3 episodes, and as you say, you don't know who gets killed at the Red Wedding in episode 3. But so it could have taken a number of different forms, and I thought it was interesting and probably quite conventional. It took a kind of chronological approach, but one of the curiosities of that, you might argue, is that it sort of situates this referendum in a wider arc of history, a sort of bending teleology, which bends towards maybe independence. Certainly, it was a story that McWhirter told that was about an emerging sense of sort of distinctive Scottish politics, the kind of falling away of a sort of uniting Britishness, the collapse of institutions, whether they be, shipyards, whatever, which maintained Scots within Britain unconsciously or minimally Scottish, and with their Scottish identity having very little political resonance in terms of devolution or whatever. So I think it was interesting in that sense that it really depicted a story about how we came to this particular pass, which I think, as some people have argued, is probably quite a good story for Scottish nationalists to tell. I mean, one of my favourite bits of it was when they were talking about the former Labour Secretary of State for Scotland, who essentially said, we don't need a Scottish Parliament, we've got me, like a sort of imperial viceroy who thinks of himself as a sort of warm-hearted democrat who knows what the good people of Scotia really want. without any of the inefficiencies of political discourse and the mess and muddle of democratic engagement. So I think that showed quite a lot about the evolving traditions, both in the Labour Party, to an extent the Conservative Party as well, through to Thatcher,